60 feet below the surface of the Caribbean Sea, the silence is absolute. Here, among the coral reefs and shifting sands of Jamaica, lies a city that shouldn't exist. Brick walls, emerald-encrusted bottles, and the hollow remains of taverns rest in a watery grave. For over 3 centuries, this was a ghost story. But in its prime, this wasn't just a port. It was the most dangerous, wealthy, and sinful place on the face of the earth. Welcome to Port Royal. In 1692, it was known as the Sodom of the New World, a city where gold was more common than bread, and where a man's life was worth only as much as the steel in his hand. Today, using the power of artificial intelligence, we are going to do what time and tide could not. We are going to drain the ocean, rebuild the fortifications, and walk the streets of a city that God himself was said to have sunken in a fit of rage. This is the entire brutal history of the sunken city of sin. To understand how Port Royal became a den of thieves, we have to look at the year 1655. At that time, the Caribbean was a Spanish lake. They controlled the gold, the land, and the trade routes. But the British Empire was hungry for a foothold in the West Indies. Oliver Cromwell sent a massive fleet to capture Hispaniola, but after a humiliating defeat, the British commanders were desperate. They couldn't return to England empty-handed. They turned their eyes toward a smaller, less defended island, Jamaica. When they landed, they found a natural sand spit at the mouth of a massive harbor. This was Caguaya, later renamed Port Royal. It was a strategic masterpiece, a deep water basin where the largest warships could anchor, protected by a narrow entrance that could be turned into a killing zone for any invading fleet. The British didn't just want a colony here, they wanted a shield, a fortress made of stone and iron that would bleed the Spanish Empire dry. They began constructing Fort Charles, with its thick walls and heavy batteries, making it clear to the world that the English were here to stay. But there was a problem. Jamaica was an island surrounded by enemies, and the British Army was thousands of miles away. To survive, they would need more than soldiers. They would need the world's most dangerous men. The governors of Port Royal faced a terrifying reality. They were sitting on a gold mine, but they had no navy to protect it from a Spanish counterattack. In a move of desperate genius, they turned to the only men the Spanish feared more than the British Army, the privateers. This was the birth of a formal alliance with the Brethren of the Coast. The deal was simple, but lethal. The governor issued letters of marque, legal documents that transformed common pirates into privateers of the British Crown. These papers gave them permission to attack, burn, and loot any Spanish ship or settlement they found. In exchange, these sea wolves used Port Royal as their base of operations, providing the city with a permanent, unpaid, and incredibly violent navy. Among these men was a young Welshman named Henry Morgan. He wasn't just a sailor. He was a brilliant military strategist with a taste for blood and gold. Under his leadership, Port Royal's reputation grew. He led daring raids on Spanish strongholds like Portobelo and Panama, returning with ships so heavy with silver that they nearly sank before reaching the harbor. This influx of stolen wealth transformed the city overnight. Every successful raid meant more gold flowing into the local economy, turning a military outpost into a glittering, chaotic metropolis of greed. The pirates didn't just visit Port Royal. They became its lifeblood, its bank, and its ultimate protectors. By the late 1660s, Port Royal had become a fever dream of luxury and vice. It was the largest and wealthiest English city in the Americas, surpassing even Boston. But while Boston was built on Puritan values, Port Royal was built on rum and stolen Spanish silver. The streets were a chaotic symphony of languages, where a common sailor could be seen wearing silk shirts and carrying pockets full of gold doubloons. Wealth flowed through the city like a tide. In the markets, you could find the finest spices from the East, French wines, and Chinese porcelain, all traded in a place that didn't even have its own source of fresh water. But it was the taverns that defined the city's soul. Every second building in Port Royal was a place of business for the thirsty and the lawless. It was said that in a single night, a pirate could spend more money on gambling and drink than a hard-working London laborer could earn in a lifetime. The city was a magnet for those who lived for today, because tomorrow was never guaranteed. Prostitutes, gamblers, and tavern keepers grew rich off the blood-stained gold of the privateers. There were no churches built in those early years, only temples of excess. This was a place where the sun never set on a sober man, and where the air smelled of salt, gunpowder, and decay. For the rest of the world, Port Royal was a scandal, a den of iniquity that mocked the laws of man and God. But for those who lived there, it was the only place on earth where a man could truly be free, as long as he had the gold to pay for it. The summer of 1692 was unusually hot, even for Jamaica. The air was thick and stagnant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Life in Port Royal continued, as it always did. Taverns were full, merchants were counting their silver, and the harbor was packed with ships. No one noticed the birds falling silent or the strange stillness of the sea. At 11:43 in the morning, on June 7th, the roar began. It started deep underground, a sound like distant thunder that rapidly grew into a deafening howl. The ground didn't just shake, it broke. Because Port Royal was built on a foundation of loose sand, a terrifying phenomenon called liquefaction took over. The earth turned into a liquid trap. Massive brick buildings, symbols of the city's immense wealth, didn't just fall. They sank into the earth as if the ground had opened its mouth to swallow them whole. Within minutes, a massive tsunami, triggered by an underwater landslide, rose from the harbor. A wall of dark water crashed over the docks, snapping the masts of great warships like they were toothpicks, and dragging everything and everyone into the depths. People were literally buried alive in the sand or swept out to sea. When the shaking finally stopped, 2/3 of the world's most decadent city was gone. Where there were once bustling streets and crowded markets, there was now only the cold, dark water of the Caribbean. For those who survived, looking out over the ruins, there was only one explanation. This was not just a disaster. It was divine justice for a city that had forgotten the face of God. In the wake of the disaster, Port Royal never truly recovered. Although some survivors attempted to rebuild on the remaining sliver of land, the heart of the city remained beneath the waves. Over time, the golden age of piracy faded into history, and the ruins were slowly covered by layers of silt and coral, becoming a time capsule of the 17th century. For nearly 300 years, the sunken city was a playground for treasure hunters and legends. But in the late 1950s, serious archaeological excavations began to reveal the truth. Divers discovered entire streets preserved under the mud. They found fully stocked kitchens, stacks of pewter plates, and pocket watches frozen at the exact moment of the earthquake, 1143. These discoveries transformed Port Royal from a myth of sin into one of the most important archaeological sites in the Western Hemisphere. It is a rare window into a world that was meant to be forgotten. Today, Port Royal is a quiet fishing village, a shadow of its former bloody glory. But beneath the calm, turquoise waters of the harbor, the wickedest city on earth still rests. It serves as a stark reminder that no empire is too great to fall, and no city is too wealthy to be reclaimed by the sea. As we use modern technology to peer into this sunken graveyard, we aren't just looking at ruins. We are looking at the echoes of a wild, lawless era that helped forge the world we know today. Thank you for traveling back in time with us. If you found this journey through the rise and fall of Port Royal fascinating, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to join us for our next deep dive into history.